Therefore, by the deeds of the law shall no flesh be justified in God's sight. For by the law is the knowledge of sin. And it seems to me that Paul was echoing, or what this verse says echoes what Paul also said in Galatians chapter 3. In Galatians chapter 2 and in verse 16. I'm going to read it quickly. So that's Galatians chapter 2, verse 16. It says here, knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law, but by the faith of Jesus Christ, even we have believed in Jesus Christ, that we might be justified by the faith of Christ and not by the works of the law. For by the works of the law shall no flesh be justified. By the works of the law shall no flesh be justified. Let me read one more verse from Galatians, which says pretty much exactly the same thing. It says it in, look at Galatians chapter 3 and in verse 11. It says here, but that no man is justified by the law in the sight of God, it is evident, for the just shall live by faith. Let me read again, Galatians 3:1. For that no man is justified by the law. No man is justified by the law in the sight of God. It is evident, for the just shall live by faith. So the big implications of these verses, of these three verses, and pretty much essence of the gospel is the fact that righteousness or justification does not come by obeying the law, by observing the law of Moses. That's what these verses are saying. Even if there was a human being, even if there was a person that was able to obey everything in the law of Moses, if you find a human being that's able to go to the Old Testament and look at the laws of Moses in Exodus, in Leviticus, in Numbers, in Deuteronomy, in Genesis, everything, obey everything that Moses commanded. Because this is a reference to the law of Moses. Obey the Ten Commandments, obey every sacrifice, burnt sacrifice, burnt offering. They will still not be righteous in the sight of God. They will still not be justified in the sight of God. That's what these verses are saying. Look at it again. Look at it again. Look at the verses again. It says, therefore, Romans 3:20, therefore, by the deeds of the law shall no flesh be justified in the sight of God. In other words, even if you did it, that's not the way that God justifies people. Even if you did everything in the law, that's not the way that righteousness is given, that God gives righteousness. And it says in Galatians 3:11, look at it again. Galatians 3:11, it says quickly that, but that no man is justified by the law in the sight of God, it is evident. For the just shall live by faith. It is through faith that God justifies people. It is through faith that God gives righteousness to humanity. Look at it. And in Galatians 2:16, it says, the latter part of it says, for by the works of the law shall no flesh be justified. By the works of the law. The word works there, meaning action, performance, obedience of the law, and doing this and doing that, and observing this and observing that. That is not how righteousness. The law, for sure, had a purpose, but the purpose of the law was not to give life, was not to give righteousness or justification to man. The law, like it says in Romans 3:20, the latter part of Romans 3:20, for by the law is the knowledge of sin. The law made sin exceedingly sinful. It gives man, or it gave to the children of Israel, the knowledge of sin. The knowledge of sin. We know what is sinful. We come to recognize the sin nature in us. Galatians 3:21. It says, is the law then against the promises of God? Of course not. God forbid. For if there had been a law given, which could have given life, then righteousness should have been by the law. Meaning that the law does not give life. Meaning also that what man really needed was life, and the law could not give it. Righteousness should have been by the law. If the law could have given life, the law could not give life, which is what man needed, which is what we get in Christ Jesus. So the problem really